I was a keeper of her story now, a guardian of the memories of the boys who had loved her first. We laid a small bouquet of wildflowers on each grave. It felt like we were finally putting them to rest, not by forgetting them, but by honoring them together. Our marriage is different now. It's not the easy, comfortable thing it was before. It's stronger, but it carries scars. There are days when a sad song on the radio will make her eyes well up, and instead of feeling a prickle of insecurity, I just go to her and hold her hand until it passes. There are nights when I wake up with a jolt, the shame of my actions a fresh wound, and she'll sense it and tell me, "We're okay, David. I've forgiven you. You need to forgive yourself." We are learning a new language of love, one that is spoken in shared vulnerabilities and a radical kind of honesty. We know now that a perfect marriage isn't one without cracks, but one that is strong enough to let the light in through them. The love letter that almost destroyed us is still in its box, but it is no longer a symbol of betrayal. It is a reminder that love is fierce, that life is fragile, and that the most profound trust isn't built on the absence of secrets, but on the courage to finally share them. The story I've shared with you all is a difficult one, and it's taken a lot to put it into words. It's a story about the shadows we carry and the damage we can do when we let our fears get the best of us. But ultimately, I hope it's also a story about healing and about the kind of love that's strong enough to go into the darkest corners of the past and come back out, hand in hand, into the light. It's a messy, complicated journey, and it's one we're still on. If you've been on a journey like this in your own life, or if this story resonated with you in some way, it would mean a lot to us if you take a moment to press that like button. These stories are about connection, about knowing we're not alone in our struggles. And if you'd like to hear more stories about the complicated realities of the human heart, please consider subscribing to the channel. We're building a community here, and we'd be honored if you'd be a part of it. Thank you for listening. It all started on a Saturday. Isn't that how it always is? The most life-altering moments never announce themselves. They don't arrive with a thunderclap or a dramatic swell of music. They sneak in on the quietest of days, wrapped in the mundane, disguised as just another task on a weekend to-do list. For me, that task was cleaning out the attic. 15 years of marriage, 2 kids, 1 house. The accumulated stuff, the physical sediment of a life lived together, had reached a critical mass. Sarah, my wife, had been on me about it for weeks. "David, we can't even walk up there anymore," she'd say, a playful smile on her lips that didn't quite hide the steel in her voice. And she was right. It was a graveyard of forgotten hobbies, outgrown baby clothes, and boxes we hadn't opened since we moved in. So, there I was, sweating in the humid, still air of the attic, dust motes dancing like tiny fairies in the single beam of light from the grimy window. I was sorting things into 3 piles: keep, donate, and trash. It was almost a meditative process. A dusty trophy from my high school soccer days, keep, for nostalgia's sake. A box of Sarah's college textbooks on sociology, donate. She was a graphic designer now. An ancient, non-functional VCR, definitely trash. I was actually starting to enjoy the trip down memory lane. I found the box with our wedding album, the white leather now a faint cream color. I paused, wiping a layer of grime off the cover, and smiled. I could hear Sarah downstairs in the garden, humming to herself as she tended to her roses. The sound was a familiar comfort, the background music to our life. 15 years. It felt both like a lifetime and the blink of an eye. We had a good life, a real one. Not a perfect one, nobody has that, but it was ours. We had our struggles, sure, but we always came through them together, stronger. Or so I believed. Tucked behind a stack of old yearbooks, I found a small, dark-stained wooden box. It wasn't fancy, just a simple cedar box with a tarnished brass latch. I didn't recognize it. It didn't look like something I'd ever owned, and it didn't seem like Sarah's usual style. Curiosity got the better of me. I figured it was probably filled with old buttons, or maybe some of her grandmother's costume jewelry she'd forgotten about. I lifted the lid, a faint scent of cedar and old paper rising to meet me. Inside, nestled on a bed of what looked like faded velvet, was a small stack of letters, tied together with a faded silk ribbon. And on top, A single folded piece of thick, creamy stationery. My heart didn't pound. It didn't stop. It just paused. It felt like the whole world held its breath with me in that dusty attic. The letter on top was addressed in elegant, looping cursive. To my dearest Sarah. Not to Sarah. To my dearest Sarah. The possessive pronoun felt like a tiny, sharp jab. I told myself it could be from her mother or her sister, but the handwriting felt masculine, bold, and confident. I picked it up. The paper was heavy, expensive, way nicer than anything I'd ever used. My hands started to feel unsteady. This felt private, intimate. I should have put it back. I should have closed the box, tucked it away, and gone downstairs to ask Sarah about it. That would have been the right thing to do. That's what the husband I thought I was, the man in the happy 15-year marriage, would have done. But I wasn't that man anymore. In that instant, a different man took over. A suspicious man. A man with a cold knot of dread tightening in his stomach. I unfolded the letter. The date at the top was from 16 years ago, just a few months before Sarah and I officially started dating. Close. Too close. But still, it was before me. That should have been a relief. But then I read the first line. My dearest Sarah, another night I lie awake thinking only of you, of the scent of your hair on the pillowcase, the sound of your laughter echoing in my quiet apartment. My blood ran cold. This wasn't a friendly letter. This wasn't a casual note. This was a love letter. A raw, passionate, all-consuming love letter. I devoured the words, my eyes scanning the page with a frantic energy. Each sentence was a gut punch. He wrote about their shared dreams, about a future he couldn't imagine without her. He talked about inside jokes I didn't understand, about moments they'd shared that I had no knowledge of. He was painting a picture of a relationship, a deep and profound love that I had no place in. It felt like I was reading a book about my wife's life, but someone had ripped out the first chapter and replaced it with a story I'd never heard. A story that happened right before I entered the scene. The letter was filled with a desperate, yearning love, the kind you see in movies, the kind that felt more intense, more poetic than the comfortable. Lived in love Sarah and I had built over 15 years of mortgages, diapers, and carpools. I felt a surge of something ugly, jealousy, a retroactive jealousy for a man I'd never met, for a time before I was even a factor. But that feeling was quickly swallowed by a much larger, more terrifying one. Why did she keep it? Not just keep it, but keep it here in this special box like a holy relic? We'd moved 3 times since we got married. This box, this letter had been packed and unpacked. It had survived every purge, every spring cleaning. It had been deliberately, consciously preserved. For 16 years, it had been a silent passenger in our life, a secret guest in our home. Then my eyes fell to the bottom of the page. The signature. My world tilted on its axis. Yours forever and always, Leo. Leo. Not David. Leo. The name meant nothing to me. I sifted through every memory, every story Sarah had ever told me about her past. Her college friends, her old acquaintances. There was no Leo. The name was a ghost, a complete stranger. And he had promised my wife, forever and always. My breath hitched in my chest. I sat down hard on an old trunk, the letter trembling in my hand. The air in the attic suddenly felt thick, suffocating. The hum from Sarah in the garden below sounded different now. Alien. Who was this woman I had shared my bed with for 15 years? Who was Leo? And the most terrifying question of all, the one that echoed in the sudden, roaring silence of my mind, was he still around? I don't know how long I sat there on that dusty trunk. The letter clutched in my hand like a death sentence. Time seemed to warp, stretching and compressing. One moment, I felt like I'd been there for hours. The next, like only a second had passed since I'd read the name Leo. The silence was the worst part. It was absolute. The sounds from the garden had stopped. The house was holding its breath. My own breathing was loud and ragged in my ears. The letter felt hot, radioactive. A poison that had leached out of the past and into my present, contaminating everything. Every memory, every shared smile, every "I love you" we'd ever exchanged was now suspect. Was she thinking of him? Was our life just a consolation prize? Eventually, my legs, stiff and protesting, carried me to my feet. I had to go down. I couldn't stay in that mausoleum of memories forever. I folded the letter carefully, with a reverence that disgusted me, and slipped it into my back pocket. Felt like a lump of ice against my skin. The journey down the rickety attic ladder was a descent into a new kind of hell. Before, this was my home. Now, it felt like enemy territory. Every creak of the floorboards, every familiar picture on the wall seemed to mock me. There we were, smiling on a beach in Hawaii 10 years younger. A lie. There we were, holding our firstborn, Emily, in the hospital, looking exhausted and blissful. A lie. It was all a lie. I found her in the kitchen, washing her hands at the sink, her back to me. She was humming that tune again. A wave of nausea rolled over me. How could she be so normal? How could she stand there, humming, with a secret like that tucked away in the attic? A secret named Leo. She must have heard my footsteps because she turned, a bright smile on her face. "Hey, you're done already? You look like you've seen a ghost up there." Her smile faltered as she took in my expression. The blood must have drained from my face. "David? What is it? What's wrong?" My own voice felt like it belonged to a stranger when it finally came out, raspy and low. "We need to talk, Sarah." I didn't sit down. Couldn't. I felt like a caged animal, prowling the familiar confines of my kitchen. She dried her hands slowly, her eyes wary, never leaving my face. The casual, sunny atmosphere of the Saturday afternoon had evaporated, replaced by a thick, heavy tension. "Okay," she said, her voice cautious. "Talk about what?" I pulled the letter from my pocket. Her eyes darted to it, and for a split second, I saw it. A flicker of something. Panic? Recognition? Fear? It was there, and then it was gone, replaced by a carefully constructed mask of confusion. But I saw it. I knew I did. I held it out to her. "I found this," I said, my voice trembling slightly. "In the attic, in a little wooden box." She didn't take it. She just stared at the creamy paper in my hand as if it were a venomous snake. "You were going through my things?" she said, her voice instantly defensive. The shift was jarring. She wasn't asking what it was. She was accusing me. "It was in a box I didn't recognize, Sarah." I opened it. "Read it." My voice grew stronger, fueled by a sudden surge of anger at her deflection. "Who is Leo?" The name hung in the air between us, ugly and dissonant. Her face, which had been a canvas of warmth and love just moments before, became a hard, impenetrable fortress. Her jaw tightened. "It's nothing," she said, her tone clipped and cold. "It's an old, stupid letter from college. It doesn't mean anything." "It didn't read like nothing?" I pressed, my heart hammering against my ribs. "It read like he was the love of your life. Yours forever and always." "Sarah, why would you keep something like that? For 16 years. Each question was a desperate plea for an explanation, for something that would make sense of the gaping hole that had just been torn in the fabric of my reality. I needed her to say he was a crazy stalker. I needed her to say it was a joke from a friend. I needed any explanation except the one that was screaming in my mind. But she gave me none of that. She crossed her arms over her chest, a gesture that was both defensive and dismissive. "I can't believe you're doing this," she said, her voice dripping with an icy indignation that chilled me to the bone. "You find one sentimental piece of garbage from my past and you build this insane fantasy in your head? It's from before you, David. Before. It has absolutely nothing to do with you, or with us. It has everything to do with us if you've been hiding it for our entire marriage." I shot back, my voice rising. "Just tell me who he is. That's all I'm asking. Just be honest with me." That was when the wall went up completely. She looked at me, but her eyes were miles away, cold and distant. "No," she said, the word flat and final. "I'm not going to dignify this paranoid interrogation. It was a long time ago. He was no one. It means nothing. End of story." She turned her back on me then, resuming her task at the sink, her movements sharp and angry. The conversation was over. She had ended it. She had denied me the one thing I needed, the truth. I stood there in the middle of our kitchen, the letter still in my hand, feeling more alone than I ever had in my life. The denial was worse than a confession. A confession would have been painful, but it would have been real. This was a lie, a cold, calculated refusal to let me in. She was protecting him, or protecting the memory of him. And in doing so, she was shutting me out completely. The woman I had loved and trusted for 15 years had just looked me in the eye and chosen a ghost from her past over me. The knot of dread in my stomach tightened into a knot of certainty. This wasn't the end of the story. For me, it was just the beginning. I had to know who Leo was, and if she wouldn't tell me, I would find out for myself. The rest of that Saturday passed in a thick, suffocating silence. We moved around each other like strangers, orbiting in the space that used to be our home. Every word was functional, stripped of any warmth. "Dinner's ready. Okay. Can you pass the salt?" We were performing the play of our lives for the kids, but the lead actors had forgotten their lines. Our children, Emily and Josh, weren't oblivious. They were quiet, their eyes darting between us, sensing the seismic shift in the emotional landscape of our family. That night, lying in bed next to Sarah was a special kind of torture. The few inches of space between us felt like a chasm. I lay there, rigid, staring at the ceiling, listening to the rhythm of her breathing. Was it the peaceful sleep of the innocent, or the practiced calm of a seasoned liar? Every gentle sigh, every rustle of the sheets was a fresh torment. I replayed our conversation in the kitchen 100 times. Her icy denial, her indignation. It wasn't the reaction of a woman wrongly accused. It was the reaction of a woman whose carefully guarded secret had been exposed. Sometime in the dead of night, with the moon casting long shadows across our bedroom floor, I made a decision. It was a cold, hard thing that settled in my gut. Trust was gone. The foundation of our marriage had been pulverized by a single piece of paper and her refusal to explain it. If she wouldn't give me the truth, I would have to claw it out of the secrecy myself. My new life, the life of a spy in my own home, began the next morning. My first target was her phone. The thought of it made me feel sick. In 15 years, I had never once felt the urge to look through her phone. It was a boundary we never had to discuss because it was unimaginable that we'd ever need to cross it. But that boundary, like so many others, had been erased. I waited until she was in the shower, the sound of the water a running clock on my treachery. My heart hammered against my ribs as I picked up her phone from the nightstand. Felt alien in my hand, a small black box of secrets. It was locked with a pattern. My mind raced. I'd seen her unlock it 1,000 times but had never paid attention. I tried a Z pattern for her favorite author, Zadie Smith. Nothing. I tried an M for our last name, Miller. Nothing. My panic started to rise. The water upstairs would stop any second. Then, a memory surfaced. Her doodling on a notepad while on the phone. Always the same swooping shape, a sort of stylized S. For Sarah. My thumb trembled as I traced the pattern on the screen. It unlocked. I was in. A wave of shame and adrenaline washed over me. I felt like a common thief, a lowlife. But the need to know, the gnawing hunger for answers, pushed it all down. I started with her contacts. I scrolled through, my eyes scanning for Leo. Nothing. No Leo. I typed the name into the search bar for her text messages. No results found. I checked her email, her social media DMs, her WhatsApp. Nothing. It was as if the man didn't exist in her digital world. A part of me felt a flicker of relief, but it was quickly extinguished. If she was secretive enough to hide a letter for 16 years, she was smart enough to delete messages. Or maybe he used a different name. The absence of evidence wasn't evidence of absence. It just made me more certain that she was covering her tracks. My investigation became an obsession, a dark undercurrent to my daily life. I became a meticulous observer of the woman I thought I knew. I started paying attention to the small details of her routine, things I'd taken for granted for years. She worked late on Thursdays. I found an excuse to drive by her office building at 7:30. Her car was there, the light on in her office window. She had a yoga class on Tuesday nights. I sat in my car down the street from the studio and watched her walk in with her mat and walk out an hour later, flushed and relaxed. Each confirmed detail should have reassured me, but it did the opposite. It made me feel crazy, and it made her seem more cunning. If she wasn't lying about the big things, it must mean the lies about the small things were even more significant. I started checking our bank statements online every night, scrolling through the mundane charges, groceries, gas, the mortgage payment, looking for a crack in the pattern. I searched for charges from florists I didn't recognize, jewelry stores, hotels. I found nothing. I was a man chasing a ghost, and the chase was hollowing me out. At work, I'd stare at spreadsheets, but the numbers would blur into the cursive script of the letter. With the kids, I was physically present but mentally miles away, running through timelines and scenarios. Dad, I asked you a question. Emily would say, pulling me back to a reality I no longer felt a part of. After 2 weeks of this fruitless, soul-crushing espionage, I almost gave up. I was turning into a monster, a paranoid husk of the man I used to be. And for what? A 16-year-old letter and a wife who refused to talk about it. Maybe she was right. Maybe it meant nothing and I was the one destroying our marriage. But then I found it. It was late on a Friday night. The house was dark and quiet, and I was doing my ritualistic scan of the credit card statement. It was a small thing. So small, most people would have missed it. A recurring charge. Every Thursday afternoon, for the last 3 months, a $14.50 charge from a coffee shop called The Daily Grind. It wasn't near our house, but it was just 2 blocks from her office. $14.50. That wasn't one coffee. That was 2 coffees and maybe 2 pastries. Every Thursday, the day she always worked late. A lie. It was a small lie, a simple lie, but it was there in black and white. She wasn't buried in paperwork. She was having coffee with someone. My mind started racing, connecting invisible dots. I remembered her mentioning a big project she was leading, the long hours she was putting in with her team. She'd mentioned one colleague in particular, complaining about how demanding he was, but also how brilliant. A man named Mark. Suddenly, my ghost had a name. It wasn't Leo, but it was a start. A name. That's all it took. Mark. The ghost of Leo was shapeless and from the past. An enemy I couldn't fight. But Mark was real. He was here now. He had a job, a face, and a recurring Thursday afternoon coffee date with my wife, paid for on our shared credit card. The discovery of that lie, that small, consistent deception, was like a key turning in a lock. Suddenly, everything started to click into place, forming a narrative so ugly and yet so plausible that I couldn't see any other possibility. My amorphous cloud of paranoia now had a lightning rod. My mind, starved for answers, began to feast. I replayed every conversation from the past few months where Sarah had mentioned Mark. I had originally interpreted her complaints about him as simple work stress. Mark is driving me crazy with this project, she'd say, rolling her eyes. He's a perfectionist. Now, I heard it differently. It wasn't annoyance in her voice. It was intimacy. The kind of familiar, fond complaint you make about someone you know well, someone whose quirks you've come to understand. The demanding but brilliant colleague was a classic trope, wasn't it? The kind of intellectual friction that sparks into something more. Had she been talking about him so much to make his presence in her life seem normal? A form of hiding in plain sight? The theory festered. Maybe this was her pattern. Maybe she needed this kind of intense, dramatic connection that our comfortable, predictable life no longer offered. Leo was the poet, the one who promised forever and always. I was the dependable husband, the one who managed the 401k and remembered to take the trash out. Maybe after 15 years, dependable had become boring. Maybe Mark was the new Leo, a fresh source of the passion she secretly craved, the passion she kept locked away in a cedar box in the attic. The thought was a special kind of acid, dissolving my sense of self-worth, making me feel like a placeholder in my own life. My investigation, once a frantic, scattered search for anything, now had laser focus. The first step was to put a face to the name. I waited until Sarah was out with the kids and went to her company's website. Under the Our Team section, there he was, Mark Chin. The picture was a standard corporate headshot, but it was enough. He was younger than me, maybe by 5 or 6 years. Sharp jawline, confident eyes, a smile that seemed to know something you didn't. I immediately felt a primal, gut-level sense of competition, of inadequacy. I ran a hand over my own tired face, saw the faint lines around my eyes in the reflection of the monitor. From there, I descended into the rabbit hole of social media. LinkedIn told me he was ambitious with a fast-rising career. Facebook was mostly private, but his profile picture showed him hiking, looking fit and adventurous. His Instagram was public. Pictures of him rock climbing, running a marathon at a craft brewery with friends. He was living a life that looked exciting, a life that looked nothing like my weekends of shuttling kids to soccer practice and trips to Home Depot. I scrolled with a sick fascination, looking for a trace of Sarah, and I found it, a like from her on a photo of his from 2 months ago. A single, innocuous tap of a screen, but to my poisoned mind, it was a secret love note. I dug deeper, looking at group photos from work events posted by other colleagues. I found one from the company holiday party. There they were, standing next to each other in a group. To anyone else, it was nothing. To me, the inches between them, the way her shoulder was angled slightly toward him, was a confession. I knew I was losing my mind. I was a man building a cathedral of suspicion out of whispers and shadows. But I couldn't stop. The digital evidence wasn't enough. I had to see them, together. I had to see what that $14.50 was buying her every Thursday. The week leading up to that Thursday was the longest of my life. The Cold War at home continued. We were polite, efficient co-parents, but the warmth was gone. I felt a grim, toxic power in knowing her secret, in watching her get ready for work on Thursday morning, knowing exactly where she would be at 3 p.m. That afternoon, I left work early, telling my boss I had a dentist appointment. My hands were clammy on the steering wheel as I drove to the daily grind. I felt disgusting, a stalker, but the compulsion to know was a physical force, shoving me forward. I got there 20 minutes early, chose a small table in the back corner, half hidden by a large potted plant. I ordered a black coffee and tried to look casual as I pretended to read emails on my phone, my eyes darting toward the door every few seconds. Then, at 3:05, they walked in. Together. They were laughing about something, their heads close together. Sarah's laugh. It was her real, unguarded laugh, the one I hadn't heard in weeks. It was a physical blow. Mark was gesturing, explaining something with his hands, and she was looking up at him, her expression a mixture of amusement and rapt attention. To my eyes, it wasn't a work meeting. It was a date. They ordered their coffees and pastries, 2 lattes, a croissant for him, a scone for her, and found a small table near the window. The $14.50. I watched them, my coffee growing cold in my hands, a silent, invisible judge in the shadows. I couldn't hear their words, but I could read the story in their body language. The way he leaned in when he spoke. The way she tucked her hair behind her ear, a gesture I hadn't seen in years. The way their knees almost touched under the small table. This was it. This was the proof. This was real, tangible betrayal happening right in front of me. I wasn't crazy. My paranoia was justified. I felt a strange, horrifying cocktail of emotions. Searing rage, profound sadness, and a sliver of vindication. I had been right. I stayed for another 10 minutes, watching them in their own little world, and then I left, slipping out the door unnoticed. The drive home was a blur. The ghost of Leo had led me here, to a coffee shop on a sunny afternoon, to watch my wife fall for another man. When I got home, the house was empty and quiet. I sat in the living room, the silence pressing in, and I waited. I waited for her to come home from her late night at work, and this time, I would be ready. The hollow confrontation was over. The next one would be an execution. I waited in the semi-darkness of our living room, a predator in his own den. The righteous anger burned cold in my veins. There was no doubt, no more confusion. I had seen them. I had the truth. All that was left was the sentencing. Every minute that ticked by on the mantelpiece clock tightened the spring inside me. I had the whole scene planned out in my head. I wouldn't yell, not at first. I would be calm, surgical. I would lay out the evidence, piece by piece, and watch her carefully constructed world of lies crumble around her. The sound of the garage door opening was my cue. I remained seated, a statue of impending doom. I heard her keys jingle in the lock, the soft click of the door closing, her sigh of exhaustion as she dropped her purse on the entryway table. She walked into the living room, flicking on a lamp, and jumped slightly when she saw me sitting there. "David, you scared me. I didn't see you." She forced a smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Long day," she said, starting to unbutton her coat. "Yeah, looks like it," I said, my voice dangerously quiet. "You must be exhausted. All those long Thursdays at the office." She paused, her hands still on her coat, a flicker of caution in her eyes. "The Johnson Project is a killer. It's just endless meetings." There it was, the lie, delivered so casually, so easily. She had walked right into the trap. I stood up slowly. "That's funny," I said, letting the words hang in the air. "Because you didn't look like you were in a meeting at 3 o'clock this afternoon. You looked like you were having a great time, actually, at the daily grind, with Mark." The color drained from her face. For a moment, she looked utterly stunned, caught. But it wasn't the look of guilt I had been expecting. It was something else. It was the shock of being discovered, yes, but not in an affair. In something else. Then, her shock hardened into a white-hot fury I had never seen before. "Excuse me?" she whispered, her voice trembling with rage. "You heard me?" I pressed, emboldened by her reaction. "I saw you too, laughing, leaning in close. Don't you dare stand there and tell me you were working late. Just tell me the truth for once." "The truth?" she shot back, her voice rising to a sharp crescendo. "You want the truth? You followed me? You sat in a coffee shop and spied on me like some kind of private detective? What is wrong with you, David? Who does that?" She wasn't denying it. She was attacking me, turning my own righteous anger back on me as a weapon. "A husband whose wife has been lying to him does that," I yelled, the carefully constructed calm shattering into a million pieces. "A husband who found a love letter to another man in his attic does that. I saw you, Sarah. I saw the way you looked at him." "The way I looked at him?" She let out a laugh, but it was a bitter, ugly sound. "Oh, you have no idea. You have no idea what you saw, because you're so blinded by this insane, jealous fantasy you've cooked up in your head." She took a step closer, her eyes blazing. "Yes, I was at the daily grind with Mark. I am every Thursday. The office is a soul-crushing beige box and we're on a creative project. We go there to brainstorm, to get out of that toxic environment so we can actually think. Yes, we get coffee. Is that a crime? It's a crime when you lie about it," I countered, feeling my certainty begin to fray at the edges. Her anger felt too real, too genuine. "I lied because I knew you'd do this," she yelled, gesturing wildly around the room. "Because I knew you would twist it into something sordid and ugly. I didn't tell you because I needed one part of my life that wasn't under your paranoid microscope. And for the record," she said, her voice dropping, each word a perfectly aimed dart, "the reason I was looking at him with such rapt attention, the reason we were leaning in close, is because he was telling me that the adoption agency had just approved him and his husband." The words hit me with the force of a physical blow. "Husband." She saw the look on my face and pressed her advantage, her voice laced with a cold, unforgiving venom. "That's right, David. Mark is gay, happily married to a wonderful man named Stephen. The intimate conversation you so cleverly spied on was him telling me, his friend, one of the happiest pieces of news in his life. But of course you wouldn't think to ask, would you? You'd rather just sit in the dark and assume the worst. You'd rather believe that I am a despicable, cheating liar." The air went out of my lungs. The entire cathedral of suspicion I had so carefully constructed collapsed into a pile of rubble at my feet. Mark was gay. It was a simple, irrefutable fact that invalidated everything. My proof, my certainty, my righteous anger. All of it was a grotesque illusion. I had been so wrong. So profoundly, humiliatingly, catastrophically wrong. A chasm of shame opened up beneath me. I had followed my wife. I had stalked her colleague. I had accused her of having an affair with a gay man who was celebrating his dream of becoming a father. Sarah, I didn't know. I stammered, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. No, she said, her anger finally breaking into a cold, desolate sadness. You didn't know because you didn't trust me. You didn't come to me, you didn't talk to me. You went behind my back and you created a story because you preferred the story where I was the villain. It was easier than just dealing with your own insecurities. She walked past me then, grabbing her purse from the table. I'm going to go stay with my sister for a while, she said, not looking at me. I can't be here right now. I can't even look at you. And with that, she was gone. The front door clicked shut, leaving me alone in the crushing silence of the living room. Mark was a dead end. My investigation had led me to ruin. I had pushed my wife away, possibly for good. And I was no closer to understanding the one thing that had started it all. The letter was still in my desk drawer. The name Leo was still a mystery. But now the mystery was deeper. It wasn't just about who he was. It was about what my search for him was turning me into. The sound of the front door closing was the loudest silence I had ever heard. It was an ending, a punctuation mark on 15 years of life together. Sarah was gone. I was alone in a house that was no longer a home, but a museum of our shared failure. For the first few hours, I just drifted. I wandered from room to room, touching the objects she had touched that morning. Her half-empty mug of tea on the kitchen counter, the book lying face down on her nightstand, the faint indentation of her head on her pillow. Each artifact was a fresh stab of pain, a testament to the life that had been here just this morning and was now gone. The shame was a physical presence, a heavy cloak I couldn't shrug off. I had become a monster from a cheap thriller, the jealous husband, the pathetic stalker. My righteous quest for the truth had revealed nothing about her and everything about the ugly, paranoid man I had become. After a night spent staring at the ceiling, sleep an impossible luxury, I knew I couldn't go on like that. The path I had been on, the path of surveillance and suspicion, led only to ruin. It had cost me my wife. Continuing down, it would cost me my sanity. Mark was a dead end, a monument to my own stupidity. The present was a minefield I had laid myself. If there were any answers to be found, they weren't here, in the life we had built together. They were in the past, in the time before me. The letter was 16 years old. The secret was 16 years old. I had to stop being a detective and start being an archaeologist. I had to dig. With a sense of grim ceremony, I went back up to the attic. Felt different this time. The first time, I was an unsuspecting husband doing a chore. Now, I was a trespasser in my own history, returning to the scene of the crime. I bypassed the cedar box. The letter was downstairs, locked in my desk drawer, but its poison was still potent. My target now was everything else. I was looking for context. I was looking for the world that Sarah had lived in before I was a part of it, the world that had created a man named Leo. I started with her college yearbooks. We met in our senior year, so I paged through the 3 volumes that chronicled her life before me. It was a strange, voyeuristic experience. I saw a younger version of her, with different hair, different friends, a face full of a youthful optimism that I felt I had personally extinguished. I scanned every club photo, every candid shot on the quad, every face in the sea of graduating seniors. I found a handful of students named Leo, but they were just names and pictures disconnected from her. There was a Leo in the chess club, a Leo on the soccer team. None of them felt right. There were no loving inscriptions next to their photos in her copy. No inside jokes. It was another dead end. Next, I pulled out the heavy, sticky-paged photo albums from her childhood and high school years. This felt like a deeper violation. Here was Sarah at her senior prom, beaming, on the arm of a lanky, tuxedoed boy I didn't recognize. Was that him? I checked the back of the photo. Me and Kevin, prom 04. Not Leo. Here she was on a family vacation, a teenager with braces, awkwardly smiling for the camera. Here she was with a group of girlfriends, laughing on a beach. In every photo with a boy, my heart would stutter. I'd dissect the body language, the space between them, the look in their eyes. Each one was a potential suspect, and each one was cleared by a name scribbled on the back or a context that didn't fit. It was exhausting. In a large plastic tote labeled High School Memories, I hit what I thought was pay dirt, a box of old letters, tied in bundles, from friends. My hands trembled as I picked one up. This was the deepest trespass yet. Reading her private correspondence. The shame warred with the compulsion, and the compulsion won. I untied the ribbon and read. The letters were a flurry of teenage drama, gossip about teachers, dreams of getting out of their small town. I scanned them frantically, my eyes hunting for the four-letter name. They talked about boys, Chris, Matt, Jason, but never Leo. The search was yielding nothing but a profound sadness. Sifting through the artifacts of her entire life, I was seeing her not as a wife who had betrayed me, but as a person. A girl who grew up, who had friends, who went to prom, who dreamed of a future. And mixed in with her past was our past. I found a shoebox filled with photos from our first year together. Our first apartment so small and cluttered. A trip we took to the mountains, both of us looking so young and carefree. The pain was immense. I was looking for the man who had poisoned my marriage, only to be confronted at every turn by the memory of the man I used to be, the happy, trusting man who had helped build it. I was about to give up, to pack it all away and admit defeat, when I found one last box. It was mostly filled with academic awards and programs from school events. I pulled out a program for her high school's production of Our Town. Sarah had been on the stage crew, her name listed in the back. I idly scanned the cast list. No Leo. I was about to toss it aside when I noticed a small, bordered section on the final page. This performance is dedicated to the memory of Michael Peterson, a student who had passed away. It meant nothing to me, but it planted a strange seed in my mind, the idea of loss, of tragedy. It was a thought that hadn't occurred to me before. Then, at the very bottom of the box, I found a small collection of things from her hometown newspaper. A yellowed clipping of her making the honor roll, another of her winning a local art scholarship. As I picked up the scholarship announcement, another small, folded piece of newsprint fell out from inside it. It wasn't an article. It was an obituary. From the same local paper, dated 17 years ago. My heart stopped. With trembling hands, I unfolded it. My eyes scanned the text, but I already knew what I would find. A bright future cut tragically short, will be deeply missed by his friends, family, and his loving girlfriend, Sarah Jenkins. And there it was. He is survived by his parents, Robert and Mary, and his younger brother, Leo. My mind snagged on that last line of the obituary. He is survived by his parents, Robert and Mary, and his younger brother, Leo. I read it again, and a third time. The letters seemed to rearrange themselves, the meaning shifting like sand under my feet. Leo wasn't the lover. The lover was Michael Peterson, the boy who died. Leo was his brother, the name that had become the villain in the story of my marriage. The specter that had haunted my every waking thought belonged to a boy who had lost his older brother, a boy who had shared a profound grief with Sarah. The entire foundation of my suspicion, the very premise of my investigation, was a lie. I stumbled down the stairs from the attic, the brittle newspaper clipping clutched in my hand. My mind was a maelstrom of confusion. Why would Leo, the brother, write a letter like that to Sarah? Was it some kind of shared grief, a letter written on behalf of his brother? It didn't make sense. The handwriting, the passion, the possessive, my dearest Sarah. It felt too personal. I unlocked my desk drawer and pulled out the original letter, the creamy stationery now feeling like a sacred text I had completely misunderstood. I laid the obituary and the letter side by side on the desk, the two pieces of a puzzle I couldn't seem to fit together. My eyes scanned the obituary again, slower this time. Michael Peterson, 18, of Northwood. Northwood. That was the small town Sarah had grown up in, the one she'd left for college. where we eventually met. Then I looked at the date of the letter. It was dated a full year after Michael's death. My blood ran cold. The letter wasn't a relic from before the tragedy. It was an artifact born from its aftermath. Why was Leo writing to her a year later with such passion? The story was getting darker and more complex with every new discovery. I had a name. 2 names, in fact. Michael and Leo Peterson from Northwood. My previous online searches had been for a ghost. Now I had specifics. I turned to my computer, my hands shaking as I typed Leo Peterson, Northwood into the search bar. The results were sparse. It was a small town. Not everything was digitized. But then I found it. A link to the archived website of the Northwood High School newspaper. I clicked and found myself looking at a grainy PDF of a student publication from 17 years ago. I scrolled through, and there, on page 3, was a section for student poetry. And a poem, a raw, aching thing about love and stars and eternity, titled For S. At the bottom, the author's name, Leo Martinez. Martinez, not Peterson. My heart sank. It was another dead end. Another Leo. I had been so sure. I slumped back in my chair, the frustration and exhaustion washing over me. I was chasing ghosts, connecting dots that weren't there. I had built a new theory out of a tragic coincidence. Dejected, I went back to the attic, back to the box of high school memories, feeling like a complete fool. I started putting things back, ready to admit defeat. As I picked up her high school yearbook to put it away, it fell open to a page near the back. A page where students signed their names and wrote messages. And there it was, a full-page message, written in that same, elegant, looping cursive from the letter. My breath caught in my throat. It was a long, rambling, heartfelt note, full of inside jokes and promises to stay in touch after graduation. I scanned the page, my eyes devouring the words until they landed on the signature at the bottom. You're my everything, Sarah. Don't you ever forget it. Yours forever, Leo. Just Leo. But next to the signature, someone, probably Sarah, had written his full name in her familiar, neat print, as if to make sure she never forgot. Leo Martinez. It was him, the poet from the school paper, the boy from the yearbook. Not Leo Peterson, the grieving brother. Leo Martinez. My mind was reeling. Who was Michael Peterson then? I looked back at the obituary. His loving girlfriend, Sarah Jenkins. Jenkins. That was Sarah's maiden name. There had been 2 of them. 2 boys. A knot of ice formed in my stomach. I went back to the computer, my fingers flying across the keyboard. I searched for Leo Martinez, Northwood. This time, I wasn't just looking for school records. I searched the local newspaper archives using a wider date range. And then I found it. An article from the Northwood Gazette, dated almost exactly 1 year after the obituary for Michael Peterson. The headline made the world drop out from under me. Local teen dies in tragic car accident. It was Leo Martinez. He had died too. 1 year after her first love had died, her second love, the boy who wrote her poems and promised her forever in her yearbook, was also gone. The realization was a physical shock, a wave of cold that washed through me, leaving me breathless. This wasn't a story of infidelity. This was a story of almost unimaginable loss. The letter. I grabbed it from the desk again, my hands trembling violently now. I read it with new eyes, the truth finally illuminating the words. It wasn't dated 16 years ago, before I met her. It was dated 16 years ago that coming Tuesday. It was an anniversary. My dearest Sarah. Another night I lie awake thinking only of you. He hadn't written it to her when he was alive. She had written it. She had written it to him. Or for him. A transcript of a memory. A way to keep his voice alive. And the signature. Yours forever and always, Leo. That was his promise to her, the one she was holding on to. She wasn't hiding an affair. She was hiding a graveyard. A graveyard in her heart where she had been forced to bury the 2 boys she had loved, back to back. Before she was even 19 years old. The icy denial. The fury when I confronted her. It wasn't the defensiveness of a liar. It was the fierce, protective rage of a survivor guarding a wound so deep so profound, that my petty, jealous accusations were a form of sacrilege. I hadn't stumbled upon a secret affair. I had trampled upon a memorial, and the weight of my own monstrous, blundering ignorance came crashing down on me, leaving me shattered in the silence of our broken home. I sat at the dining room table, the letter and the 2 yellowed newspaper clippings laid out before me like funeral rites. The truth didn't set me free. It imprisoned me in a new kind of cell, one built of shame and a profound, aching guilt. Every ugly word I had thrown at her, every suspicious glance, every moment I had spent painting her as a villain replayed in my mind, each a fresh turn of the knife. I hadn't been a husband protecting his marriage. I had been a vandal, spray painting my own selfish, paranoid fears over a sacred memorial. She hadn't been hiding a lover. She had been guarding a tomb. I couldn't leave it like this. I couldn't let her stay at her sister's house, believing that I was still that man, the monster who followed her to coffee shops. I had to go to her, not to demand anything, not even to explain. I had to go to her to atone. I carefully folded the clippings and the letter and put them back in the cedar box. They were her story to tell, not mine to wield as evidence. The drive to her sister Chloe's house felt like the longest of my life. I rehearsed 1,000 apologies in my head, and every one of them felt flimsy and inadequate, incapable of covering the chasm of pain I had opened between us. When I knocked on the door, Chloe answered. Her expression was a mixture of ice and granite. She stood in the doorway, blocking my path, her arms crossed. "What do you want, David?" "I need to see her, Chloe. Please," I said, my voice barely a whisper. I knew how I must look to her, the cruel husband who had driven her sister away. And she was right. "I don't think that's a good idea. She's been through enough," she said, her voice sharp. "Please," I repeated, and something in my face, some measure of the utter devastation I felt, must have broken through her anger. She stared at me for a long moment, then sighed and stepped aside. "She's in the backyard." I walked through the unfamiliar house and out the back door. Sarah was sitting on a porch swing, wrapped in a blanket, staring out at the yard but not really seeing it. She looked small and exhausted. She heard my footsteps on the deck and her whole body went rigid. She didn't turn to look at me, but I saw her shoulders tense, bracing for another impact, another fight. This time I had no fight left in me. I slowly walked over and sat on the far end of the swing, leaving a wide space between us, trying not to crowd her. For a long time we just sat in silence. The only sound was the gentle creak of the swing's chains. Finally, I found my voice, and it was broken. "Sarah, I'm so sorry." The words were a pathetic down payment on the mountain of debt I owed her. "What I did of following you, accusing you, it was monstrous. There's no excuse for it. I was wrong. About everything." She still didn't look at me, just kept her eyes fixed on the horizon. I could see the hard line of her jaw. She was waiting for for the excuse, for me to try and justify my actions. I wouldn't give her one. I had to go further. I had to show her that I knew. I took a deep, shaky breath. "After you left, I went back to the attic. I wasn't looking for an enemy anymore. I was just trying to understand. I looked through your things from Northwood. I saw a flicker of movement, a slight turn of her head. I had her attention. I had to choose my next words more carefully than any I had ever spoken in my life. I had to handle them like unexploded ordnance. "I know," I said, my voice soft. "I know about Michael." Her body jolted, a small, sharp intake of breath. I gave her a moment. Then I said the other name, the one that had haunted me for weeks, but now carried a new, tragic weight. "And I know about Leo." That was it. That was the key. Saying his name. Not as an accusation, not as the name of a rival, but as the name of a boy. A boy she had loved. A boy she had lost. Her body began to tremble, and the rigid defense she had held for so long, for 16 years, finally crumbled. A choked sob escaped her lips, a sound of such profound, ancient pain that it felt like it was torn from the very center of the earth. The dam of her grief, held back for a decade and a half, burst. She turned to me, her face a mask of tears, and the story she had held inside for so long came pouring out in a raw, incoherent torrent of anguish. "I didn't know how to tell you," she wept, her words punctuated by ragged gasps. "How do you tell the man you love that your heart is a minefield, that it's full of ghosts?" She buried her face in her hands. "I met you and you were so good, so normal. I wanted to be normal for you. How could I tell you that I felt like a widow, twice, before I was even old enough to vote? Felt shameful, cursed. I was so scared," she continued, her voice muffled by her hands. "I was terrified that if you knew, you'd look at me differently, that you'd see me as broken, damaged goods. So I packed it away. I put them in a box and I thought I could just leave it there. But it's not how it works. The grief is always there. And the letter, sometimes on the anniversaries I take it out, just to remember his voice, his words. It was the only thing I had left of him. My own tears were flowing freely now, tears of shame, of sorrow, of a love for this woman so deep it physically hurt. I had been so blind. All this time, I thought she was keeping a secret from me, but she was trying to protect me, and protect herself. She was protecting a wound so catastrophic that words couldn't possibly do it justice. All my pathetic detective work, my suspicion, my rage, it was all the blundering of a fool in a holy place. I moved across the space between us on the swing and wrapped my arms around her. She collapsed against me, her body shaking with the force of her sobs, and I just held on. I held my wife as she finally, after 16 years, grieved openly for the boys she had lost. And I grieved with her, grieving for them, for the girl she used to be, for the man I had failed to be, and for the years of trust we had lost because I was a man who saw a rival where I should have seen a scar. We sat there for a long time, the rhythm of the porch swing the only motion in a world that had gone still. The storm of her tears had passed, leaving behind a fragile, quiet calm. Her head rested on my shoulder, and I could feel the warmth of her returning. A slow thaw after a long and bitter winter. Chloe had come out at one point, placed 2 mugs of steaming tea on the small table beside us with a soft, sympathetic look, and then retreated, leaving us in the sanctuary she had provided. Finally, Sarah sat up, pulling the blanket tighter around her shoulders. She took a sip of tea, her hands still trembling slightly, and when she spoke, her voice was quiet and clear, like the air after a rainstorm. "You have to understand," she began, not looking at me but at her own hands wrapped around the mug. "Northwood, it's a small town. Everyone knows everyone. Everyone knows everything. When you're a teenager there, your whole world is the size of the town square." She told me about Michael Peterson first. He was her high school sweetheart, the boy next door, literally. Their story was woven from the cliches of first love because, for them, they weren't cliches. They were real. He was the captain of the football team. She was the editor of the school paper. He taught her how to drive stick shift in his beat-up old truck. She helped him with his English papers. They planned their future in whispers under the stars. College, a house, a dog. A simple, beautiful, achievable life. He was safe, she said, a sad smile touching her lips. He felt like my future, like the ground beneath my feet. And then one rainy Friday night in November, a drunk driver crossed the center line, and the ground just disappeared. One moment he was there, and the next he was just a story people told. She described the funeral, the sea of pitying faces, the unbearable weight of being 17 and having to wear a black dress for a reason like that. I felt hollowed out, like someone had scooped out everything inside me and left an empty shell. Then she told me about Leo Martinez. Leo was fire, she said, her voice changing. Michael was the ground, but Leo was the sky. He was a poet, he was angry, he was brilliant, and he drove his parents crazy. He had been friends with Michael, but not close. He didn't treat me like I was a fragile piece of glass. Everyone else walked on eggshells around me. Leo just got angry with me. He told me to stop being a ghost. He made me yell, he made me laugh. He was the first person who made me feel alive again. Their love was different. It was fierce, forged in the ashes of her grief. He wrote her poems on napkins. They'd drive for hours just to watch the sunset from a different hill. He was going to be a writer, she was going to be an artist, and they were going to burn their small town to the ground with the brightness of their future. "That letter," she said, looking at me directly for the first time. Her eyes clear and full of a sorrow so deep it felt bottomless. "It was one of the last things he wrote to me. He'd gone to visit his grandmother for the weekend. I got it in the mail on a Monday. He had died on the Saturday night on his way home. Another car accident. Patch of black ice. Just cosmic, cruel, bad luck." She let out a dry, humorless laugh. "For a while, I was convinced I was cursed. The town whispered about it. The tragic girl. The one who lost them both. By the time I was 19, I felt 100 years old. That was the girl she was when she left for college. The girl she was determined to leave behind. When I met you," she said, her voice softening as she reached out and touched my hand, "you were like a new beginning. You were kind and funny, and you had this solidness about you. You were a new story, a story that wasn't about death. And I wanted to be in that story so badly. I wanted to be the woman who deserved you." She finally explained the secret, the one I had so horrifically misunderstood. "I never told you because I was ashamed of the weight of it all. I was terrified it would define me in your eyes, that you'd always be waiting for the other shoe to drop, that you'd see me as broken. I thought I was protecting you, protecting us, by keeping that part of my life separate. I put it all in that box, and on the anniversaries I'd let myself go there. I'd open it, I'd read his letter, and I'd let myself be that 19-year-old girl for a little while. I'd grieve, and then I'd close the lid and come back to you, to our life, to our children." She looked down at our hands, her fingers lacing with mine. "I was wrong. I see that now. Keeping it a secret didn't make it go away. It just let it fester. When you came at me with that letter, so angry and suspicious, my first instinct wasn't to explain. It was to protect them, to protect their memories from what felt like an attack. I built a wall, and I'm so sorry that I hurt you and pushed you away. I listened, my own shame a quiet, necessary ache in my chest. I finally understood. The cedar box wasn't a coffin for a competing love. It was a shrine. The letter wasn't a threat to our marriage. It was a testament to my wife's incredible, resilient heart. A heart that had been shattered twice and had still found a way to love me, to build a life with me, to give me everything. I looked at the woman beside me, not as a suspect or a liar, but as a survivor, and I had never loved her more. The drive home from Chloe's was quiet, but it was a different kind of silence. It wasn't the hostile, icy silence of the weeks before, thick with unspoken accusations and resentment. This was a fragile, contemplative quiet, the kind that follows a storm, where the air is clean and the world feels new and raw. Sarah's hand rested on the center console, and I covered it with my own. We didn't need to speak. For the first time in what felt like a lifetime, we were breathing the same air, existing in the same emotional space. When we walked back into our house, it felt different. It was no longer a crime scene or a Cold War battleground. It was just our home, waiting for us to decide what to do with it. The damage was immense. My paranoia and suspicion had been like a wrecking ball, smashing through the foundation of trust we had spent 15 years building. Her secrecy, born of fear and old pain, had left cracks in the walls I'd never seen. We couldn't just patch the holes. We had to rebuild. That night, after the kids were asleep, we sat at the kitchen table, the place of our first hollow confrontation. But this time, there were no battle lines. I looked at my wife, at the faint lines of exhaustion and grief around her eyes, and I knew that understanding her story was only the first step. Atonement was a longer road. "I broke this, Sarah," I said, my voice thick with a shame that was still fresh. "My fear, my insecurity, I used it as a weapon against you. I am so sorry. I know those words aren't enough, but I will spend every day for the rest of our lives trying to be the man you can trust. The man you should have had all along. The man who is strong enough to help you carry your ghosts, instead of trying to fight them." Her eyes filled with fresh tears, but this time, they were not tears of pain. It was a look of profound, weary relief. "And I will let you," she whispered. "I'm so tired of carrying them alone." The healing was not a single event, but a slow, deliberate process, made up of 1,000 small moments of choosing honesty over fear. A few days later, I came home from work to find the cedar box sitting on our bed. My heart seized for a moment, an echo of the old dread. But Sarah was sitting there, a calm expression on her face. "I don't want to hide it in the attic anymore," she said. "It's a part of my story. It's a part of me." Together, we found a place for it on the high shelf in our closet. Not hidden in the dark, but not on public display either. It was an acknowledged piece of our history now, a quiet testament to the past that had shaped the woman I loved. A month later, on a clear, crisp Saturday, we drove the 2 hours to Northwood. The kids were with my parents. It was just us. Sarah directed me through the quiet streets of her hometown, pointing out her childhood home, the high school, the diner where she and Michael used to share milkshakes. And then we went to the cemetery. It was a small, peaceful place on a hill overlooking the town. She led me to 2 graves side by side, Michael Peterson and Leo Martinez, beloved sons, friends, brothers. I stood there, my arm around my wife's shoulders as she wept softly, and I felt no jealousy. The ghosts were gone. In their place were just 2 boys, 2 lives cut tragically short. I wasn't their rival. I was the one who had been lucky enough to live, lucky enough to meet Sarah after the fire had passed, to build a life from the rich soil of her resilient heart.